Hi again, derived energy back in the house, continuing where I left off. That's it. Okay, someone says, you must have led a very sad and happy life, which is a shame. Should you choose to end it, that is always an option, but don't believe all people are so unhappy. That simply isn't true. To which I replied, 1. My antinatalist views are principally informed by my altruition and compassion for others. 2. Even if your claims were true that I must have led a very sad and unhappy life, that would only strengthen my position. It would be like dismissing someone who speaks out against racism because they themselves were a victim of racism. 3. I never claimed that all people are so unhappy as you put it. I just don't see how that affects the basic integrity of the asymmetry, or how the asymmetry should inform our ethical position regarding the immorality of procreation. 4. Suicide isn't an option for me because I am irrationally petrified of death. The only difference is I don't allow this irrationality to impact upon my views as to whether or not it is ethically sound to procreate, because I understand that this irrationality is a product of having a sentience that I never asked for, nor required or needed, and was in fact imposed upon me, without my consent, by someone else's irrational and ill-informed will. 5. My suicide would create a significant amount of the very same kind of suffering for my family and friends that I am strongly motivated to reduce, and if at all possible, eliminate before it has even begun. Someone picks up, he quotes me having said, I am irrationally petrified of death, and he replies, there is nothing irrational about it. The survival instinct is the prime directive for all of us living things. So here he's equating the survival instinct with rationality. It's just a bold assertion. Those who go willingly to their deaths often do so by using some irrational justification. So again, we just have this bold assertion without any argumentation whatsoever. Okay, moving on to the next page. Someone says life is short, and I say a purely subjective call. 3 years in a hospital ward could seem longer than the entire time during one's childhood, adolescence and young adulthood. Go forth, I reply. I'm glad you didn't add and multiply on the end of that sentiment, laughing out loud. Have some fun. To which I reply, well, I might as well try and make the best of a losing situation. Adopting such a strategy, unfortunately, involves blinding myself to the sheer extent of pointless suffering, harm and misery that has been going on the surface of this pale blue dot for the last 200,000 years or so, at least for modern day humans. With my unflinching ability to see through the lies society and culture sells us every day of our lives, it is more difficult for me to clear my mind and focus on some mere distracting and fleeting bursts of endorphins in order to distract myself from the travesty we call the human condition. He says, stop trying to unscrew the inscrutable, and I reply, unfortunately for me, the inscrutable is very much discernible to me because I have a keen mind, a strong compelling need to perceive the truth, and a comprehensive knowledge of the philosophical, psychological, and to a lesser extent scientific issues that are needed in order to pull apart the ultimate existential question, to wit, to be or not to be. Just because other people can't see it because of cultural indoctrination and because of the psychological defense mechanisms they employ that I've been exploring in my discourse analysis work, that most assuredly does not mean that it is indiscernible to me. I believe you really need to see a psychotherapist. Has it not occurred to you that you may be unwell? I'd say you're suffering from negative cognitive behaviour, and while I am no expert, your way of thinking is clearly disturbed. All I'll say on this is he's not an expert because I've never heard of anything called negative cognitive behaviour. Someone says, do you normally deconstruct everything that you read clause by clause? This is rationality taken to its absurd conclusion. And I reply, I do when I'm researching something as pivotally as pivotively significant as the human condition. If you don't use consistency and systematical thinking, then your findings can be unduly corrupted by subjectivity. Again, no argumentation from my opponents, a recurring theme. And I describe researching the human condition as pivotively significant because I think it's pivotally even significant that we understand and recognise that the human condition is pointless. Someone says, you see, people who are optimistic and happy aren't at all realistic, but they live better lives. Those who do really know the score are usually clinically depressed. The moral of the story is, suspend disbelief once in a while. Do the Peter Pan thing, even if you can't fly. Yes, happiness is crazy. And I reply, so you want to perpetuate insanity and suffering into the indefinite future with mankind's exponentially increasing advances in technology and his penchant for creating new sentient life and utter lack of moral progress. And there's a very astute reply made to that, and he just says, utter tripe. And I reply, no argumentation. So I thought I'd spell it out for this guy who said my view was tripe. I said, insanity, the view that happiness is a good thing that constitutes a reason to bring new sentient life into the world for the sake of the person you are bringing into existence. So that I could have also have added existence confers an advantage over non-existence. Suffering, uncontroversial. Rate of technological advances, uncontroversial. Lack of moral progress, the endless cycles of war and destruction when viewed from a time frame exceeding the current lifespan of a human being, the endless exploitation of other people by those in power. I mean, I could have developed a few more themes there. Penchant for creating new sentient life, uncontroversial. Moving on to the next page. Someone says they're proudly avoiding suicide, and I said, so am I. For the sake of my family and friends, and for the fear of dying, if nothing else. Any other reason is irrational, and I would prefer to be non-existent than a frightened and deluded animal. Someone says, my own perception of death is that as we approach the moment of death, the nervous system begins to close down the body completely. I'll start again. My own perception of death is that as we approach the moment of death, the nervous system begins to close down, the body completely relaxes, and as the logical brain gradually descends into oblivion, it experiences a euphoric state as a total absence of pain and physical tension. And I reply, yes, there's been some research done in that area, and your observations are not unwarranted. However, the process of actually dying can be a long and drawn out process. Indeed, it takes an entire lifespan. Someone replies, tell that to the so-called parents of baby P. Now, to those of you not in the know, baby P was a well-documented case in British media, and it was about this 5-year-old boy who he was basically maltreated and tortured and eventually found dead. And I replied to this guy who said tell that to the so-called parents of baby P. I said, my point was that we start dying the moment we are conceived, and this process does not relent until we are dead. The actual length of the lifespan is irrelevant to my point. Baby P's lifespan was however old he was when he died, and this is exactly how long it took for death to find him. It's interesting to note that you cite the death of just one poor individual dying prematurely under extreme physical distress and mental anguish. I say this because you could have just as easily mentioned the 40,000 children who die every day of malnutrition in order to make your point more persuasive. It's fascinating to me how people's empathy and altruism drops off the more people there are in a certain plight. This phenomenon would certainly have its evolutionary roots. But I think the media, especially tabloids such as the Daily Mail and the Daily Express and so on, do a very big disservice to mankind by endlessly parroting on about one little individual's suffering when there are literally millions upon millions upon millions of people who are in absolute hell out there. Someone says, there are also millions upon millions who live happy, fulfilling lives. And I say, I've already addressed that. All those lives are not worth a goddamn thing. When it comes to thinking about having kids, watch my video and then think about it. The Zagrag needs your help video. And then I say, watch my video at the top of this thread and then explain to me how this makes up for even a tiny bit of suffering in the world. Someone says, yep, most of us are just trying to get through the day. It may not be very intelligent of us, but it's what we have to do. And I say, case closed. Someone says, not at all, I have 1,000 experiences I would prefer to have had than to have missed. On balance, I prefer to have experienced life. I'm just trying to find where I commented to that. I'll just move on to the next page. Oh yes, the guy or lady who said that they would prefer to have had these pleasant 1,000 experiences than to have missed them. I said, what the hell has that got to do with the ethical implications of bringing a new child, sentient creature into this universe? You obviously have no aptitude or moral awareness for this subject whatsoever. In my thought experiment in my video, we can fully anticipate the consequences of bringing in billions of people who would live joyously ecstatic lives for all of eternity, and we still prevent this from occurring because of the suffering of one little boy. Your current subjective appraisal of the quality of your life isn't worth a giraffe's fart when it comes to discussing the morality of procreation! Exclamation mark. Someone says, I still cannot see the sense in either party's argument. And I say, I've given reasons for that based on evolutionary psychology. If you can't see the issue clearly despite hearing my cogent and intellectually persuasive and compelling arguments, then mankind is in even bigger strife than I have hitherto considered. If intellectual honesty and compassion are not your top two priorities, then my position can always be refuted. One can always refute my position by adopting some form of moral nihilism, or by otherwise refusing to acknowledge the wisdom in my words and providing irrational reasons, or none, for refusing to do so. I get into a bit of a barney with one poster. He says that I'm deluded and self-important, and I say, I got really sarcastic with him. He just annoyed me, so I said, okay, you're the one who's holding all the aces. I'm completely deluded. I need to go to a psychiatric ward. My arguments don't stand up to close scrutiny, and they've completely been dismantled by you. Well done, mate. I didn't pursue wisdom by intellectual means. I didn't use any logical reasoning. I didn't analyse fundamental beliefs or assumptions. Nice, I don't like what you were saying, so you must be wrong card. Great manoeuvre, devastating critique of my position. I love the way you deconstructed my video and thought experiment. Masterful, bravo, and also concisely and tightly argued. I'm in awe of you. Please teach me philosophy, great master, I beg you. This is a little bit beneath me, to be honest. In fact, it's completely beneath me. I'm not proud of posting that. Someone says, do you ever stop to think that if your parents had thought as you do, you wouldn't be here to argue your ridiculous theory? I mean, I'd already replied to that once, but I replied again and said, no, I've been immersing myself in antinatalism philosophy for several years, but I never stopped to consider that. Silly me, I'm completely bowled over by your levels of abstract thinking. So again, you know, I'm being sarcastic. So I'm not proud of that comment either. I apologise for it, and I apologise for it in the thread. Someone says there's nothing irrational about the fear of death. And I said, but it is irrational. This fear is built into us by blind, crude forces, so that we are better at passing on our DNA into the next generation. Where is the logic in that? There's nothing logical or rational about it whatsoever. It's rational to fear death, but the actual basis for that fear is itself irrational. That's coming up to 15 minutes. End of video.